Hello, it is 6 a.m. in Washington. It's 12 noon in Tripoli. I'm Monita Rajpal. You're watching CNN, the world's news leader. This is World One, live from London. War crimes and torture. These are the accusations being leveled against anti-Gaddafi forces in Libya by the human rights group Amnesty International. It's usually the Gaddafi regime that's accused of violence and wrongdoing, but in a new report out today, Amnesty says anti-Gaddafi fighters have also committed abuses that could amount to war crimes. They include the alleged lynching of captured Gaddafi soldiers. Amnesty is urging Libya's interim leaders to get a grip on armed groups, but it is pointing the main finger of blame at Gaddafi loyalists, which it accuses of being behind the bulk of human rights violations in Libya. Well, Libya's interim leaders have responded to Amnesty's findings, vowing to try to bring armed groups under their control and investigate any incidents of human rights abuses. We want to bring you more on the Amnesty report with Diana El-Tahawi. She's one of the co-authors and she joins us now from the Libyan capital, Tripoli. Diana, thank you very much for being with us. I guess, first of all, I want to ask, how do you differentiate during a violent offensive, during a war that is taking place right now in Libya, as an example? How do you differentiate between what would be considered a war crime and, say, defense?
Well, war crimes are crimes like arbitrary shootings, such as indiscriminate attacks against civilians or attacks targeting civilians. It's also a war.
Al-Tahawi there, thank you very much for joining us from Tripoli. Iran may be about to release two young Americans convicted of spying. Shane Bauer and Joshua Fattal could go free in 2 days on condition they each put up $500,000 in bail money. Their lawyer says the families of the men are trying to get the money together quickly. Iran sentenced the two men to 8 years in prison. The men say they were hiking in Iraq and accidentally crossed into Iran. Well, joining us now on the phone from Tehran is journalist Shirzad Bozorgmir. Shirzad, tell us a little bit more about how all of this came about, because it was just in August that these two were sentenced to 8 years in prison, and now we understand they could be freed in just 2 days. Well, we are just receiving reports of an attack on the U.S. embassy in the Afghan capital of Kabul. Explosions and gunfire being heard around the city. The Taliban is claiming responsibility for the attacks. We want to get more on this from CNN's Suzanne Malveaux, who joins us now from Kabul. Suzanne, what's happening?
Well, Monita, we're about a mile and a half away from where all of this is taking place. It is just unfolding, but it started within an hour or so, about an hour ago. We are getting word from the Afghan police as well as eyewitnesses.
Suzanne Malveaux there in Kabul, thank you so much. At least 26 people were killed in Syria on Monday. That's according to human rights groups. Among them, a 12-year-old boy reportedly shot dead when Syrian security forces fired on a funeral procession. Welcome back. Here at CNN, we are putting our global resources into investigating modern-day slavery. And it is a daunting task because there are as many as 30 million people held as slaves around the world. Our CNN Freedom Project is putting a human face on that staggering number. And our latest example comes from what you might think is an unlikely place, not far from a major world capital. Police are questioning 5 suspects northwest of London after freeing 24 men on Monday. Officials say the men were held as slaves, some for as long as 15 years. CNN's Atika Schubert reports the suspects have been charged under a new anti-slavery law.
British police say they have rescued 24 men that were kept as virtual slaves. According to the UK Human Trafficking Centre, in the last 2 years, almost 1,500 cases of slavery and human trafficking have been reported to police. And now, with the new anti-slavery law passed in Britain last year, anyone convicted of holding a person to servitude can spend up to 14 years in prison. Atika Schubert, CNN, London.
So now we know the extent of the slavery problem in Britain, but what about the rest of Western Europe? We put that question to the head of the group Anti-Slavery International.
I think unquestionably in terms of absolute numbers, we're talking about South Asia being the largest numbers of people in the world.
We asked Britain's Home Office to discuss this issue with us. They declined, but they sent us this statement signed by the UK's Immigration Minister, Damien Green. It reads, "The government is tackling human trafficking and building on our strong record in supporting victims. fighting traffickers and stopping this horrible trade from happening. We have recently published a national human trafficking strategy. We will be adopting the EU directive on trafficking, and we are creating the National Crime Agency to further improve our response to this brutal crime. The statement goes on to say these measures, along with improved victim care arrangements, will ensure that all victims, adults and children, receive care tailored to their specific needs. You're watching World One live from London. Coming up. In the two
The Garuda Indonesia Experience.
Welcome back. A hero's welcome for Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan as he touched down in Cairo last night. But as ties warm between the two countries, Israel could find itself left out in the cold. We want to see what newspapers around the world are saying about this. In the UK, the Daily Telegraph's headline is Israel watches alliances crumble. The comment piece says Turkey's mildly Islamist prime minister is attempting to regain some of his country's influence by presenting himself as the champion of the Palestinians' plight. He is tapping into one of the most emotive issues in the Arab world and winning huge popularity as a result. In the United Arab Emirates, the National has this headline: Israel's political tsunami is largely of its own making. The opinion piece says Israelis were right that this autumn would bring a diplomatic tsunami. They just didn't realize that its cause would not be Palestinian statehood, but the wave of Arab revolutions. And finally, from the United States, the Washington Post has an opinion piece headlined "Lonely Israel." Two words that says it all. Israel is looking more isolated than at any time in decades. The core demands of the Arab Spring have nothing to do with Israel. Scapegoating Israel will not satisfy the imperative for change. Libya's interim leader addressed supporters in Tripoli. In other parts of the country, the battle for Libya seems far from over. We want to cross now to CNN's World Affairs correspondent Jill Doherty. She joins us now from near the town of Bani Walid, which is still in the hands of the Gaddafi regime. And Jill, again, it seems as though there is no let up in terms of, or there's no real indication, I should say, in terms of who may be getting the upper hand. What can you tell us about what's actually happening in Bani Walid?
Yeah, well, right now, where we are, Monita, we're on a checkpoint right here, as you can tell. And these men...
Kenyan police say they have made one arrest in the kidnapping of a British woman and the killing of her husband at a beach resort in Kenya. Britain's Telegraph newspaper reports that 56-year-old Judith Tebbit is deaf, which could add to the difficulty of her ordeal. Officials say she could have been taken across the border to Somalia. Rohit Kashru has more now from Kiwayu Island.
It is a paradise of privacy and seclusion. Hardly a person for miles, as we saw today.
Rohit Kash reporting there from Kiwayu Island. Well, as we've just heard, the resort lies near the Kenya-Somalia border, an area prone to attacks by Islamist militants and pirates. David McKenzie has reported extensively from Kenya and is following the case closely. He joins us now from CNN Center in Atlanta. And David, you know, the Kenyan authorities have been calling this, they're classifying this as a bandit attack. But I guess many are asking, because of this as a luxury resort, you know, what do we know about this area, and in terms of if there's any security within the area?
Well, there is security in the area, Monita. Certainly that resort in Kiwayu, it's well known to people who live in Kenya and people who visited Kenya. It's sort of a luxury resort.
Last week's heavy rain in New York, there was a Monday finish to the U.S. Open Tennis Championships, but as Alex Thomas can tell us, it was well worth the wait. Well, it really depends on whose side you're on.
Well, that's true, but I think even the neutral liked it.
Yeah.
The men's singles final featuring the world's two highest ranked players.
Welcome back. This is World One live from London. We are approaching almost 7 a.m. in New York, 1 p.m. in Berlin, and 8 p.m. in Tokyo. Here are some of the stories that we're talking about in the newsroom. Forget the stereotypes. Men are programmed for child rearing. A new study shows testosterone levels in men drop once they become a father. A team from Northwestern University say it shows men are biologically wired to care for their offspring, and it could benefit men in other ways as well, as low testosterone is associated with lower risks of prostate and testicular cancer. European astronomers say they've found 50 more planets outside our solar system. They include 16 so-called super-Earths, planets with masses less than 10 times the Earth's, and one of these planets is orbiting its sun within what's regarded as the habitable zone, where water would be in a liquid state. It's about 36 light years away, 3.5 times Earth's mass, and it may or may not look like this artist's impression. And now we go from distant points in the universe to Miss Universe. Miss Angola, Lila Lopez, has beaten 88 rivals to take the crown at the beauty pageant in São Paulo in Brazil. Miss Ukraine was first runner-up. Online voting by the public was allowed for the first time, but that still wasn't enough to help Miss Colombia. She was reprimanded for not wearing underwear. She didn't even make the top 5 despite her attempt to win more with less. Katia still causing problems in parts of Europe. We're switching gears and looking at weather now. Meteorologist Mari Ramos is at the World Weather Center with more on that. Mari.
Hey, yeah, Katia, that storm has become a later this week. Back to you.
And the list goes on, Mari. Thank you very much. World One continues after this break. I'm Monita Rajpal. You're watching CNN.